Everyone, Jordan with Team J Classroom Fun. So excited to have you back here on my YouTube page today. Again, make sure you subscribe and like so you don't miss out on anything. Today, I'm continuing on with my series on math rotations, which if you watched a video or two back, I switched to using math rotations like, I don't even know, 8 or 9 years ago. And it has been a game changer for the way I've taught math. And I've seen tons of success and growth with my students, which that's what it's about, right? We want them to be getting things and doing well. So last time in my series, I talked about the why. I also then had one on math pretest. So if you missed those, be sure to go back. Today, we're going to be moving on and talking about what to do with those math pretests and how to group your students. So let's go ahead and share this. So for flexible grouping, and this is another reason why I love math rotations, is no kid is stuck. Let's be real. I remember as a kid, with reading groups and math groups, it was like, well, you're in the red group, you're always in the red group, or the bluebird group, or the whatever in the world we called them. And you were pigeonholed, right? You were there the whole year. Now, of course, sometimes do you maybe need to be in the same group? Sure. But sometimes you might be strong in one area of math and maybe need more help in another. And if you're in the same group the whole time, you're not necessarily getting what you need. So being flexible with your grouping is something that's really big with math rotations and something that's been really helpful. So as I mentioned, the last two sessions, one was on the why I switched to math rotations, the next one was on math pretests, and today, flexible grouping. So for flexible grouping, I actually regroup for every unit. So as you saw in the pretest one, I actually will make a pretest before I start each unit. I will give the pretest and then I will group the students based on how they do on the pretest. This also sometimes lets me know like what kind of groups I need to have. Some years kids are really strong in number sense, or maybe they're really strong with counting coins or telling time. And I might need to have like 2 high groups, or sometimes maybe they're struggling and I need a few low groups or more in the middle groups. The pretest lets me know kind of like what kind of groups I need. It also lets me know who needs what skills so I can make sure those kids are grouped together so I can give them the skills that they need. Now, as I mentioned, they are flexible for each unit. So maybe someone is really good at addition, great. Maybe they're not so great at counting coins and they really struggle with that. Well, they might be in a higher group for addition and they might be in a lower group for money. And that's okay because they're getting what they need. But it's important that I don't just go, oh, well, they're high in addition. So of course they're going to be high in money. They might not be. Or sometimes I've had some kids that maybe they really struggle with addition and subtraction, but like spatially, like with geometry, they're really strong in that area. Well, I need to make sure I'm not just putting them in the low group because they were struggling with one thing. I need to make sure I'm moving them around based on what they need. Next thing, groupings. Now, obviously, this all depends on your class size. I have had some extremely small classes where I've had like 4 kids in a group because I only had 16 students. Yes, I know. I know that was small. I know. I've also obviously had larger classes. When you have larger classes, you have to have more kids in your group. Now, I will say the larger the group, the harder it is. Currently, right now, I want to say, because I have 23 students, I mean, roughly, I have 6 kids in a group. Obviously, one group is smaller, but some of it too depends on how they're doing with things. So sometimes I might have a group of 4 and a group of 7 and then a few groups of, you know what I mean? Like it just depends on where the kids are at with the skills, and it depends on your class size, and it depends on behaviors because all that's going to factor in. As I mentioned, the groups are determined based on the pretest info. So I use that pretest to then figure out who should be in which group to get what they need. Groups can even change during the unit. So sometimes based on a pretest, I was like, okay, this kid seems to really have a grasp on this. He really understands multiplication. And then I start teaching him in group the first day or two, and I'm like, I think we're missing some things that I didn't realize we were missing. So then I can switch him mid unit, right? I don't need to wait till the end of the unit to be like, oh no, he didn't get what he needed. Same thing. Sometimes I've had kids that I'm like, oh, I don't know if they really have a grasp on this. And they maybe just didn't do very well in the pretest. But as I'm working with them in small group, I'm like, oh my gosh, they know this. They need to move to this group so they can be challenged. So it's okay to be changing things in the middle. As I mentioned, like I said, flexibility is key. This example here, you might be in group one for money, but maybe you're really strong in multiplication, so you're in a different group for that as well. Behaviors need to be taken into account as well because these groups will be moving on to do some more independent activities. So you do want to keep in mind like how the kids work together and behaviors and things like that as well. Okay, here's an example of what I do. So as you can see here, I have that time pretest that I looked at last time. On here, I wrote down students' names of who were missing certain skills, and then I formed my groups. Group one is typically my group that needs some more help. They're struggling a little bit more. And then group four tends to be my group that's doing really well and is ready for a challenge. Now, two and three will depend. It depends on the skill. Sometimes I end up with like three high groups and one group that needs a little more help. Sometimes I end up with three groups that really need a lot of help and one high group or two in the middle. I mean, it kind of just depends on the skill and things, but that's where, again, this flexible grouping really comes in handy. So this then shows how I've broken them into four groups based on their pretest, and then this is how then I'll pull them during that math rotation time. Okay, here's another example. As you can see, I even crossed some people out. I moved some people around. And like I said, sometimes until you get into it, you don't fully know. Like the pretest does give you information, but having that kid in front of you, literally solving problems, you learn a lot about them. So sometimes you have to make changes. Another thing I want to talk about is kind of a little bonus tip here in this one. The initial setup of this. When you are starting math rotations, it is really important that you go slow and that you're patient. You are not going to have the first time you do this, unless you have like the most angelic class ever. You are not going to have a super smooth first time, probably. I'm not going to lie. The first few times I did this, I was like, oh, there's too much going on. There's too much noise. It's chaos. They don't know what to do. And every year, even when I started again, especially back in August, when you have a new group of kids and you're getting to know them, they're getting to know you, you're setting up your management. It's going to be a little rough at first. And it's going to be a little chaotic and it's going to feel a little bit like everyone's everywhere. But I will tell you, and I've seen this with all the groups, it does eventually smooth out and it becomes like clockwork. The kids know what's expected. They know what to do. Your groups will run nicely. They're going to get the practice they need and it's great. But you do have to be a little patient. And I know like I'm a type A person. That can be really hard for me because I'm like, well, didn't go well, throw it out, do something new. But this is one of those that you have to give it a little time. Kind of like when you start literacy stations or math stations, right? Like you're not going to have 10 stations up and running and the kids know what to do and boom, you're fine. Like it's going to take time. So recommendations so that it's not super chaotic. You want to slowly introduce each step. When I often do math rotations, like back at the beginning of the year, or if you're starting out now, I normally start with like two rotations to start. So obviously, is it fully what it needs to be? No. But this way they can get used to you're going to come work with me in a group on the rug for a bit, and you're going to go play a game with your partner for a bit. And then we switch. So they also get used to the, doorbell chime or whatever you use to switch. This way they know like, okay, when a set time is up, I have to move on to my next activity. Then I move into typically three rotations. So same thing, I add one more thing on, and then eventually I get up to the four. I do use four rotations. I'm sure you could do more, but timing wise, four has worked well for me. Next thing, model, 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 model. We all know as teachers, modeling is key. Responsive classroom, which I was trained in a long time ago, is really big on that as well. You need to show them what to do. You need to have kids model what to do. You need to talk through what to do. You need to praise what we're doing. And modeling is really important. Also, too, don't pull groups right away. So this is something else you can do. When you're first starting out, especially when you're doing 2 and 3 rotations, sometimes I'll have like 2 rotations and one will be play a game and the other will be do like their computer activity. And so this way I can monitor and make sure like we understand volume levels. I can make sure like, okay, we're working together as partners. Okay, we know how to log into the computer game. And so I can kind of build up as I go. So you don't have to pull groups right away. I mean, you don't want this to go too long, obviously, because the point is pulling groups, but it can be a way to ease into it. Okay, so that's all I have for you today. Next time I'll be talking about what I do for the mini lessons. So that is the little first part of the math instruction where I do teach whole group. So I'll be sharing with you what I do there. Again, feel free to leave a comment if you have a question. You can also reach out to me on Instagram and I will see you next time. Talk to you later.